Hi, everyone. Welcome to the New Evangelicals podcast. My name is Tim Whitaker. I am the host of the show. The New Evangelicals is a nonprofit organization holding space for folks marginalized by the Evangelical Church, advocating for accountability in evangelical spaces, and helping people explore the Christian tradition beyond the basement of evangelical fundamentalism. This podcast aims to bring you a guest that hopefully challenges your preconceived notions of your own faith tradition or helps you think outside of your own box. So join us here every week, sometimes more than that, for a new episode talking to a new guest. With that being said, I want to say two more things. Number one, if you like the podcast, please give us a rating and a review or subscribe to us on YouTube. And we are a nonprofit organization holding space for thousands of people trying to renegotiate their faith. If you want to help be part of that work, you can donate at the link via our show notes. All donations in the U.S. are tax deductible. All right, friends, let's get into this week's episode. All right. Well, it is really an honor to have you on the podcast, Billy. Like I said before we started recording, thanks so much for making time. And thanks again for the documentary. God forbid was, I can't say I enjoyed watching it, but it was a necessary watch. And I appreciate you putting it together, frankly.
Well, thanks. And thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. I always like asking our guests ahead of time or, on the show to kind of kick us off. I'm always curious about their engagement with, in particular, evangelicalism. Did you grow up in any of those spaces? Was that a world that was foreign to you until you started doing this documentary? What was that like for you?
Well, I was born Jewish in Miami. I suppose I was raised Jewish, but not very observant. I suppose you could call me a lapsed Jew at this point in my life. But I was very intrigued by religions, plural, I would say. I much to the annoyance of some ex-girlfriends, I like to listen to Christian rock on the radio. I watched TBN, the Trinity Broadcast Network, pretty obsessively. I was just intrigued by not only beliefs, but what people were willing to do for them in service of them, how people were willing to exploit them. And I don't know. And I was intrigued by the entertainment value of it. I suppose I was, growing up Jewish, there was never any proselytizing. We were never interested in converting anyone to our cause. We were never judgmental about your burning in hell and suffering for all eternity if you didn't believe what we believed, despite all the chosen people stuff, there was a real live and let live kind of quality to it that for me was, you probably hear this a lot from American Jews, was mostly cultural. It was about the socialization. It was about family. It was about telling stories and allegories that would teach us lessons to be better people and to fight against oppression. Really, that was what Judaism really meant to me, if I had to sum it up. It wasn't about worship. It wasn't about, synagogue or temple. It was about understanding what it meant to be, for people to be persecuted and to avoid that and to accept, I think, other people's beliefs. And I always thought to myself, what does Jesus need all this money for? I mean, they're on TV 24 hours a day with the phone number, like asking for this money, and then and I thought, what if Jews did this? Can you imagine if there was a cable network where Jews were just asking everybody to send them in money, or they were going to burn in hell, or whatever? Like but it wasn't judgmental. It was like, to me, sociologically, so compelling, and I don't know. I was intrigued by it.
I mean, that is all fair. It's actually interesting because today, as of this recording, we just released our episode where I talked to Rabbi Mike Harvey. He wrote a book called A Jew Speaks to Christians. And we actually had these conversations that came out. And he mentions a lot of this stuff. And by the way, let me also say, you're more than welcome to curse on the podcast. Okay, you can say bullshit. No problem there for me, just so you're aware of that. I know some people see the evangelical name and they go, I don't know how I should respond. You can just speak your mind on this stuff. But I really agree with you. Even as a kid growing up in fundamentalist evangelical evangelical spaces. I was homeschooled for 9 years, really grew up in the, we have to tell people that if they don't get saved, they're going to burn in hell. I had a lot of the same questions of like, man, is that the way it has to work? And why do people need so much money to do it? And I think that's what led a lot of people, including myself, to, I would still claim to be obviously a follower of Jesus, having the account The New Evangelicals, but really critiquing my own evangelical heritage and saying, I think it might be more about power and control than about actually, like you said, trying to fight oppression and do the good and the best thing for our neighbor.
Yeah, and I was fascinated by like Benny Hinn and what's his name? The guy who's still around with the miracle healing water.
You
Peter
got Baker.
Popoff. Peter Popoff.
Yeah, another one.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like fascinating and like and the prosperity gospel and Creflo Dollar. That's a little more contemporary. But growing up, I mean, we came of age during the PTL scandal and Jim Baker and Jim and Tammy Faye, Jimmy Swaggart, and then of course Jerry Falwell Sr. trying to navigate that controversy because it was really dragging down sort of all the televangelists and their credibility and their ability to raise money. And I mean, so there was, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we grew up with a great deal of questions and cynicism, or let's say bare minimum healthy skepticism about not religion per se, but the people who were the leaders of it, and who were, like I say about this documentary, God forbid, it is not about Christians and Christianity. It is about people who exploit Christians and Christianity for power and profit. And that, I think, is what was always so intriguing to me about organized religion.
I think you couldn't have said any better. And we tell people the same thing where it's like, listen, I'm still committed to Jesus. That's why I do this work, because I'm concerned about what's happening in his name by these people. So is that what drew you to the documentary and trying to cover the Jerry Falwell Jr. scandal? I'm not sure what you want to call it. Was it that you always had this fascination with this like evangelical megachurch culture, or what drew you to it?
I mean, it's always been sort of in the back of my mind, I suppose, is almost, more of a hobby, just sort of like, armchair historian or sociologist.
Sure.
And I think I want to make it clear too, like I have seen faith heal people, not necessarily physically, but spiritually, mentally. I've seen faith perform what I would consider real miracles, not water into wine, but taking a drug addict and turning them into a responsible parent and productive member of society. Seeing faith transform a murderer into a veritable saint in comparison to their early, their younger years. I mean,
sure.
I'm a great believer in what works for you. And I don't smoke pot, but if smoking pot does that for some people too, that's cool. Do it. And I know that people, particularly in a program in sobriety, like they can't do it without a higher power, without the ability to call on whatever that God is to find the internal strength to change their compulsion every day to use or to drink or to whatever snort or inject or whatever it is that has been destroying them. That's the demon and that's the God to me. But that's a very real thing. Like that's a very tangible thing. That's something that you can see. And I believe, but what the famous jurist once said, your right to wave your arms around ends where my nose begins.
That's right.
So when you start to impose your beliefs, and more importantly, want to transform the government in a way that is antithetical to the values of our Constitution, and even the founding fathers who were not secularists were very well aware of the danger of the church being too involved in the government. They had just escaped that. This was the form of government they were deliberately creating to avoid that. And when when we watch, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here because I want to answer your question.
Sure.
Which is to say, let's be real. The subtitle of the documentary is The Sex Scandal That Brought Down a Dynasty. So we were initially drawn in by the candy, if you will, the sex scandal,
Right.
which was to us a fascinating story about hypocrisy and abuse of power. Um, but an interesting thing happened on January 6th of 2021, and the conversation about this
Yeah.
term Christian nationalism, not something I was really familiar with, because
Yeah.
it's such a foreign concept to our country and to our values and to our way of life, that I didn't really know what that was. And so, but that's when we realized that maybe this story is bigger than just the quote unquote pool boy sex scandal, that maybe we have a more important responsibility to tell the story. Yes, that's the micro, but the macro is this story of the 50-year multi-generational evangelical dynasty that had outsized influence over presidential politics.
Yeah, the audience who is listening to this can't see me nodding my head furiously at everything you're saying, but
you're going to get a concussion.
Yeah.
Get it down there,
I can't help it. Instead of interrupting you, I'll just nod. I have to get it out somewhere, because you're totally correct. I mean, we've been tracking Christian nationalism for about 2 years now. The January 6th insurrection was, man, I mean, it was a moment for me that was just, oh my God, what the fuck is happening? I could not believe it. But as I studied this more and started listening to folks in this world, all of a sudden it began to make a little more sense. And Jerry Falwell Sr. in particular was one of the folks who, I was kind of taught a mythologized version of the moral majority. Oh, the moral majority functions to end abortion. Well, not really its origin story. It's actually a lot darker and more cynical than that. Over segregation and even Christian schooling really being birthed out of parents saying, well, no son of mine will go to school with a black person, so we'll start our own private school series. I mean, we've covered that. So I really do want to say I sincerely appreciate that you maybe pivoted a little bit and included and tied those threads together, because a lot of folks might think, oh, well, Jerry Falwell Sr. or Jr. just made a small mistake and, no big deal, which is kind of the Christian thing to say these days for a lot of reasons that I don't like. But, deeper than that, the dynasty of the Falwells and how he really brought Trump to the forefront and really pushed a lot of what we're seeing now of Christian nationalism is a narrative that goes largely untold. So thank you for sharing it in that documentary, because it was so needed to see that way.
Oh, thanks for saying that. You work on these things for years, and you wonder if, well, A, if anyone's going to see it, and then B, if anyone's going to get it. And that was certainly the idea, was to make it a little bit more thought provoking. Certainly not to kink shame the Falwells, who to me seem like a great time. I'd love to party with Jerry Jr. and Becky Falwell, hop on the Liberty University private jet down to Miami and, go to the nightclubs and swingers clubs and what have you. And I don't know, they really do seem like a lot of fun, the issue of course becomes, this holier than thou hypocrisy and the idea that they would impose this way to live. Well, this what's become so dangerous about leaders in our time, which is do as I say, not as I do. The idea that there's a party that would put women in jail for getting abortions, but the men who finance them go to the U.S. Senate. I mean, there definitely is a disparity there, and I think a disparity as well between the leadership of Liberty University under Jerry Falwell Jr. and let's say the true believers, the people who not only believe in or follow the Gospels, but who believed in the mission of that institution, for better or worse, but who at least had some purity of motive and spirit, and whose parents wanted to send their kids there to be protected and to learn under a certain set of values. Like, so be it. Like, that's their decision and that's their prerogative. But to have them punished for dancing and punished for cohabitating or sex outside of wedlock
or swearing
or drinking or get out of here. While the leaders of that's the thing. Like, if there's real, I call, God forbid, it's like the movie Get Out meets The Righteous Gemstones. Because Giancarlo is kind of, he's kind of honey trapped into this world of power and privilege. He by his own description is intoxicated by this world, being in the Falwell's inner circle, rubbing shoulders with the most powerful people in the world, and he's a partner in a multi-million-dollar real estate venture less than 1 year after meeting Becky Falwell at his job as a pool attendant at the
Right.
Fontainebleau Hotel. I mean, like, it's also,
Right.
it's nuts. And he was aware that this is like, I'm living in a movie, I'm living in a dream. And of course it turned eventually, Get Out style, it turned into a nightmare.
Yeah. No, you're 100% correct. What I'm kind of curious, how much engagement or research did you have while making this documentary when it came to, like, there's a pretty decent movement of former Liberty students who are advocating for change and accountability. Were you able to be in contact with any of them or get their thoughts on what you were creating? Because when that documentary came out, many reached out to me directly saying, oh my God, this is my experience. Also, some even said, I'm still at Liberty and really nothing has changed regarding, how they treat. Did you have any interaction with students from Liberty while making the documentary?
I'll answer the former first, and then address the latter. Yes, we interviewed Dustin Wall of Save 71 in the documentary, in addition to talking to several other people off camera with similar concerns and passions for reform at Liberty. And it was very informative, and because, again, this is sort of where I say, like, if there was collateral damage or real victims of this scandal, it certainly would be the Liberty students and the faculty, people who, again, those who may have purity of motives and intentions, and yet as a result of this scandal, the quality of their education was diminished, the value of their diploma was diminished, certainly the reputation of their institution was diminished. Listen, I'll tell you, after that loss to FSU this weekend, I'm embarrassed to say I graduated from the University of Miami. So I can only imagine, so when I hear people like, and this has been a very popular sentiment on Twitter over the last week, in response to the documentary, people saying, I'm embarrassed that that's my alma mater. That, what a terrible thing to feel, you spent 4 important years there. You probably spent some important money, or your parents a lot of money, your parents there. And I don't think there's any joy in that. I mean, I like it. I think it's a shame that people would feel that way about their alma mater, because they're embarrassed that other people, are learning this about the school. But but the last thing you said, it's a shame to hear that maybe the change is not coming fast enough or satisfactorily enough for some of the students there. And I really, and I wish them well. I know Giancarlo did. Giancarlo, at first, he did not see the Falwells as hypocrites, because they weren't religious leaders to him. He knew them as the party couple in Miami. Like, they didn't proselytize to him. And despite the fact that Becky Falwell, Giancarlo says, repeatedly told him, you're perfect, in terms of his, he went to Catholic school. He was raised as a Republican down here in Miami. And so he fit the profile in terms of what they were looking for in this relationship. But when he started to make relatively regular trips to Lynchburg to stay with the Falwells and visit the campus, and they would make repeated overtures to him to come and work there for them at Liberty and live in Lynchburg, to be closer to them. He started to feel bad for the students who he was 20 years old. Like, he related to them, and he sort of felt like, maybe these folks should know who the leader of their university is, and who it is that is enforcing these very strict rules that compromise their financial future with these monetary fines, that compromise their academic and economic futures with suspension and possible expulsion, really over the same exact conduct that Giancarlo was partaking with the Falwells daily.
Yeah. For me, again, growing up in this whole world of just evangelical thinking, scandals like this are not new, and I'm sure you know that. There's a whole army and list of people who have engaged in behavior that is hypocritical and sometimes downright harmful, whether it's actual abuse or something like that. And you're right. I as well, with where I am with my sexual ethics, I'm like, listen, if that's your thing, like, it's your thing. It's not my thing, but it's your thing. But when you're running a school and also running political campaigns advocating for quote unquote family values and traditional marriage, and how the libs are trying to take over America and destroy the country, etc. And then this happens. And then on top of that, other leaders in those circles, like Franklin Graham, for example, who's outspoken, says nothing about Jerry Falwell Jr., or it goes under the rug. It really gets people like me incredibly fired up. I mean, I'm really reserved here because I'm interviewing live, but behind the scenes, sometimes I just say a lot of swear words and go, I still, even though I grew up in this world, cannot believe how the blatant hypocrisy is so in front of your face. And these leaders who claim to have the objective truth of God's word, quote unquote, and God's objective truth is this sexual ethic, says nothing. So I'm curious for you, for you personally, was it astounding to see the blatant lies and cover-ups that weren't even that good of a cover-up be accepted in evangelical spaces? Or for you, and based on the work that you do, is this kind of just like par for the course?
Well, I'm from Miami, so it's pretty. It's all of this is what we call a Tuesday in Miami. And so no, I mean, I'm rarely shocked, but regularly disappointed. And so
good way of putting it. Yeah.
This is, I think, one of the most surprising things I learned, thanks to Randall Balmer. Who not only explains his this history in our documentary, but does so even more thoroughly in his 2014 Politico article, "The Real Origins of the Religious Right."
Great article.
This for me, the idea of the cynicism and the conspiratorial nature of weaponizing Roe v. Wade and abortion, not for pro-life purposes, but for pro-power purposes, was particularly disappointing and distressing and sinister, really, to me. The Catholics, to their credit, jumped right on this issue from the moment Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973. And many evangelicals considered it, in fact, a Catholic issue, because there was significant dissent in the evangelical community about whether or not they should even deal with this, because evangelicals, by and large, were completely and quite deliberately outside of the political conversation in this country, and wanted to be. They wanted to be left alone by the government, and so they left the government alone. And in fact, there was a lot of conversations all throughout the evangelical community for 4, 5, 6 years following Roe v. Wade, where they said, you know what, this isn't really an issue for the government to be involved in, consistent with their, small government, leave us alone, we leave you alone kind of conservative ideology. They said this decision is between a woman, her doctor, her family, and her faith. And we don't want the government involved in that. Yeah. And through those very same years, you had people like Jerry Falwell Sr., you had political operatives on the GOP side, like Paul Weyrich, market testing, as Dr. Balmer says, these different culture war issues, because they weren't really succeeding with their segregationist platform. That was not a winning argument in the public sphere in the 60s and the 70s during the civil rights movement. So they said, let's pivot from that. This whole IRS thing wasn't very sexy either, that they were going to lose their nonprofit status because they were they had they were resegregating their schools, They tried divorce, anti-divorce, obviously famously against pornography, the whole People versus Larry Flint part of this story. They were against the Equal Rights Amendment and feminism and women's rights. They were against the LGBTQ community. In fact, Jerry Falwell Sr.'s first taste of political success was when he came down here to Miami. And he fought alongside Anita Bryant to overturn Dade County's gay rights ordinance in 1977. And they were successful in doing so. But again, not an issue that a lot of people were really galvanized by. And they were looking for money and they were looking for power. Yeah. And what they realized was the demagoguery of quote unquote baby killers was actually a winning issue. They could manipulate more people in a very cynical fashion by weaponizing abortion, despite the fact that they really did not. There was nothing sort of pure or pro-life about that position.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the Southern Baptist Convention was extremely pro-choice when that ruling came out. I mean, you can see it in their bylaws how they had the same position of, hey, this is between the mother, the medical provider, and their faith. And then as time went on, that shifted as well. Yeah, that I think those are all really great points. And again, in the evangelical culture, they really go under the radar, right? I mean, it's a very mythologized origin story of we've always been fighting for religious freedom and values and family values, and then Jerry Falwell Jr. does this, and all of a sudden it's no big deal, and no one's perfect, etc. So I'm kind of curious, was there any other threads or any other content that because of time for editing you had to leave on the cutting room floor? That's like, man, I wish we could have got this in the documentary, but time just wouldn't allow for it.
There's one really interesting bit because we compare the rise of Reagan to the rise of Trump, and Jerry Falwell Sr.'s passionate advocacy and campaigning and galvanizing for the first time ever of the evangelical voting bloc for Reagan. That voting bloc would help to elect every single Republican president from Reagan forward. Pardon me. What was particularly interesting about that election in 1980 compared to 2016, and this is one of the very important comparisons that we had to cut for time in 2016, was that Ronald Reagan was running against a Baptist Sunday school teacher in Jimmy Carter. And yet the evangelicals came out against one of their own, turned on him in order to support a divorced former B-movie actor turned so-called conservative politician who, as governor of California, signed one of the most permissive and liberal abortion laws in the late 1960s in the entire country, whose campaign slogan was "Let's make America great again." Yep. But they enjoyed the theatricality of him, the pandering of Ronald Reagan. He was an intuitive actor and improviser, and they helped elect him. And then decades later, once again, you have Jerry Falwell Jr. aspiring to be the kingmaker that his father once was, being the first evangelical leader to endorse Donald Trump, a twice divorced New York playboy, with a Democrat, no less, pro-abortion, 5 children from 3 different women, in a primary, and this is what we cut out, in a primary where Ted Cruz was running, where Ted Cruz had in 2015 announced his presidential campaign at convocation at Liberty University. A man who was an evangelical, whose father is a pastor, who very much thought he had that endorsement in the bag. And then to see once again Jerry Falwell Jr. kind of stab one of his own in the back in pursuit of this demagogue. Yeah. What that was, we talked, we did an entire interview that got cut out of the documentary, and with Rick Tyler, who had helped run Ted Cruz's campaign, who helped set up that convocation at Liberty for the campaign announcement, who believed very much so that they were promised the endorsement from Jerry Falwell Jr.
Yes, yes.
And so that's a whole kind of interesting subplot that we didn't have time for in the doc.
I think in Gangster Capitalism, they cover that thread, or in God We Lust. One of those covers like that thread on the podcast side a little bit. And I remember listening to that and thinking, oh my gosh, this is, at the time, it was such a revelation for me. And I thought, wow, like, it's just amazing how, you're right. I mean, the arc here is power, right? Jerry will go wherever the power is. I was going to ask, in your estimation, based on doing this documentary, how much was Jerry Falwell Jr. responsible for Trump becoming president? Because it seems like in the documentary, the way it's painted is like, hey, without this connection between Jerry Falwell Jr. putting Trump kind of in that like evangelical light and then defending him, I don't think we would have gotten Trump as much. But what do you think based on your estimation?
Well, if I recall correctly, Trump was effectively elected by like 150,000 votes or less in like 3 counties or like 3 states, you know?
Right.
So when you're dealing with the Electoral College, every vote counts. And it was a very, very close election, which of course he lost the popular vote in
Yes.
2016. So you're talking about a soccer stadium's worth of people in 3 states that really elected Donald Trump president. So everyone, and you had record support for Donald Trump from the evangelical voting bloc, more so than including Reagan, you know, than the Republican nominees before him. I always wonder what people would have said on the right and the left had Barack Obama showed up to the Democratic National Convention with 5 children from 3 different women, what the rhetoric would have been like then. But nonetheless, Trump showed up that way and not only won, but won, I think, 81% or something of the evangelical vote, which is so again, you know, can you credit? I think you have to credit everybody who had any part in delivering a voting bloc, not just convincing a few people here and there, but Jerry Falwell Jr. is the one who kicked the door open for other evangelical leaders to say, I guess we can take a second look at this hedonist from Sodom and Gomorrah, New York City, you know, and say that it's okay to endorse him and tell our followers, our flock, to do so.
Yeah, well, I mean, 2016 for me, and for a lot of people, I mean, I'm not sure if you heard of the term deconstructing. It's a big thing happening in evangelical spaces where folks are losing their theology because they grew up in these spaces. I mean, in my case, the people who as a child taught me about sexual purity, you know, how masturbation and porn was bad, how Playboy is bad, how I should save myself for marriage, they were then telling me in 2016 that I was a bad Christian for not voting for Donald Trump. And I remember thinking, like, wait a second, you guys, you understand what you're telling me to do, right? Like, all of a sudden there's just 180. And for a lot of people who grew up in these spaces who I would say took their faith seriously, right, really bought in, it was incredibly shocking. And it was a realization that just because you share the same beliefs doesn't mean you share the same values. And a lot of people in my spaces walked away from the evangelical church while trying to find better paths forward that were still faithful to Jesus. And the Trump 2016 and then subsequent, I mean, it just got worse over time. I thought it would get better, where as Trump lied more and said things that were dehumanizing, that more faith leaders, especially evangelicals, would say, you know what, we really found our limit here. We really can't do this anymore. Unfortunately, it only went the other direction leading up to the 2020 election. And then again, faith leaders, Christians, evangelicals were the ones who were pushing this stolen election narrative. So for folks like me, this is why we left that way of being Christian and are trying to find better paths forward that are more liberating, because we could not reconcile how we grew up and what we were taught, and then those same people doing a 180 and then almost gaslighting us, telling us that, oh, well, you're not real Christians anymore. How could you vote that way or have this view? It's all liberal Marxism, progressive garbage. And we're like, am I losing my mind here? So that's kind of the other side of it, you know, from my vantage point, is like, yeah, I'm with you on this completely. You know, it is crazy what happened.
If your faith makes you a better person, makes you a better parent, makes you a better friend, a better neighbor, you know, a better daughter, a better son. I mean, like, I love it. More power to you. I don't really care who or what you worship. I would hope that you would also not care who or what I worship. Yeah. But most importantly, what I think we're seeing from so many pulpits, and what many Americans, particularly Christians, were critical about following 9/11, was preaching hate from a pulpit, was using fear and demagoguery and violence, and the threat of violence, of inflicting terrorism, in order to control people, in order to control government, the outcome of elections. I mean, what how is this any better than Islamic extremism? This is, this form of political violence, um, it's the Taliban. These are American madrasas that you see in these religious schools that are indoctrinating students, not in love, not in acceptance, not in peace, but in hatred of people who are different than you, who believe differently than you, who may love differently than you, who look different than you, whose skin color may be different. I just don't understand what little I know about Jesus and the Gospels, how that is consistent with those teachings and those values, and what those allegories are really attempting, the values that they're attempting to instill.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I tell people all the time, I said, listen, read the Beatitudes, read the Sermon on the Mount, and then look at how these people are acting, and then tell me how it lines up. And this is not even a deep reading of a very complicated book that is the Bible. I mean, you can do a fundamentalist, straight up version, just read it in English and see something isn't right. So one of my questions I wanted to ask you, and again, I thank you for your time and making this interview happen with me. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but to me, I would imagine if you're making a movie, there's always some kind of audience in your head that you're like, man, if only they could see this, hopefully it would do this. Who was your target audience, at least in your mind, when you were creating the documentary? Was it evangelicals, just a general population? Who were you thinking about?
Hulu subscribers, Tim.
That's me. I'm one of them.
Listen, so much information and entertainment is so siloed now. I wanted to tell what we hoped was an accurate history. We also, the vast majority of our interview subjects are Christians. One of them is an evangelical pastor in Randall Balmer. Again, all of their beliefs and their facts may not be consistent with everyone's beliefs or what they believe the facts to be. But I was profoundly moved while interviewing them and getting into a conversation about January 6th and the Christian iconography, the religious leaders, who were present, the prayer, the QAnon shaman, breaking into the people's house and praying. For what? Praying, in service of insurrection, in the disruption and potential overturning of a free and fair democratic election, in the potential execution or attempted execution of the vice president of the United States, of the Speaker of the House, of the second and third most powerful people in the line of succession in our country. The first time in the history of the United States that the traitorous flag of the Confederacy flew inside our nation's capital, people who attempted to overthrow the government of this country in pursuit of being able to kidnap and enslave and torture fellow human beings for their own means. I mean, just an extraordinarily hateful and heinous moment in our history with religious iconography everywhere, and how profoundly saddened and heartbroken the people that we interviewed were. I mean, someone saying unequivocally, obviously, there was nothing Christian about what took place on January 6th. And I realized it's not so obvious to a lot of people. It's really not so obvious because they have a very different view on what perhaps Christianity is and means. And those are really the people I hope would see it and take pause and just say, okay, well, maybe maybe we're not sending our best, to borrow a turn of phrase. Maybe we can do better. Maybe we can be not just better Christians. I don't know that I even know understand what that means personally, but be better Americans.
Yeah. No, I want the audience to know I did not pay Billy to say any of that, because I rant almost like that, like word for word. So, it's just so interesting that you frame it like that, because literally we do so much content and we've covered the 6th. I mean, and we will continue to cover it incessantly, because you're right. When you're watching people pray to Jesus in the Capitol building, thanking him for this victory. And then Christians say, well, just a few bad actors. It's like, whoa. We need accountable Christians. Okay. That's what we're asking for. We understand that no one's perfect. People do bad things, but can we have some accountability in these spaces? And it seems like in evangelical circles, there isn't.
Mike Pence, by all accounts, is a Christian. They built a gallows to hang him for crying out loud.
Totally.
I mean, how is that the Christian thing to do?
No, I'm with you all the way. How has reception been overall to the documentary? I mean, the trailer dropped a few weeks ago. It took off on Twitter. I shared it. People in my spaces were so excited, asking me, Tim, are you going to watch it? I'm like, of course I'm going to watch it. This is my job. I'm watching it on day one. So I did. I loved it. I made a video about it. How's reception been for you overall with the documentary?
It's been overwhelming, mostly positive, but obviously a fair mix of both. That's the nature of these things. You produce them so that people will watch them, so that hopefully people will talk about them and maybe agree or disagree, and we can have conversations like this. And I hope that that's what it does. Is the best documentaries, I think, are just the start of a conversation. They're just it's an hour and 48 minutes. We do our best to tell the story, but really it's just it kind of opens up a lot of can of worms over the course. I mean, there's any 5, 10, 15 seconds of that documentary could be an entire documentary or an entire episode or an entire hour in and of themselves. And I would hope that just people, would be willing to have those conversations. They're also, documentaries can be a Rorschach in many ways, because we all bring our own experience and baggage along with us. And we see different things, different things mean different things and also speak to us. My buddy Dan Levitard, a Cuban-American Miamian, he was fixated on some of the characters in the story, including Giancarlo, who he knew just from growing up as a Cuban-American in Miami. Like he was so fixated on that part of the story, because again, that was his experience and his baggage. So he wanted to talk all about them, and him and his parents and how he was raised and how he was he felt he was got in over his head and was led astray here. Like he was fixated on that part of it. You and I are having this this is the new Evangelicals. We're having that part of the conversation. Some people want to talk just about the Trump part of the story. Some people want to talk about the sex. Some people want to talk about the real estate hustle kind of part of the story. Some people want to talk about Liberty Universe. I just think there's a lot going on there, and I'm happy that people are giving it a chance. Again, people who may or may not agree with some of the interview subjects and their take on this, but are willing to say either, this is interesting, let's have a conversation about it, or fuck this. There's people who say, fuck, this is a propaganda piece, or this is this or that. It's which I don't think it is. I think there are some inconvenient facts. I think history can be terribly unpleasant, and history can make us feel uncomfortable, even modern history, and I think that that's okay. I think it's a conversation worth having.
Well, I'll tell you, the part that I felt most vindicated by was a couple of years ago when the original story about all this dropped. I think it was Reuters that did a report on it. I shared it on my Facebook, and my senior pastor at the time accused me of gossiping. And I was like, I said, you should read the article. This is clear, But then in the documentary, towards the end, there's a scene where you have actual video footage of them on a FaceTime call that honestly I gotta be honest with you, Billy, like my jaw dropped, and there were two reasons to this. Number one, because in the documentary, there's like dramatized, portions where you have people kind of acting out certain scenes. So I thought it was one of these, like, we're acting out the scene. And then I go, holy shit, that's the actual video. And then you see Jerry pop behind a door while this is happening, which I'm not going to say opinion. I think it's some objective truth here that obviously they knew exactly what was going on. I mean, Jerry was obviously aware of this situation happening, and to me, I felt incredibly vindicated in my head by saying, see, senior pastor from years ago, I was not lying to you. I have the evidence right here. But yeah, that part for me was by far the most shocking.
I feel like "see senior pastor from years ago" is a very common phrase for you.
It is.
I feel like you probably start a lot of sentences or social media posts with that phrase, Tim. But what? Pardon me. When you asked me earlier about things that shocked me,
Yeah.
I didn't want to. I could have. I guess I could have said that, prefacing it with a spoiler alert, because yeah, what we do with documentary filmmaking is we kind of straddle journalism and entertainment.
Hmm.
So we're always, it's always in service of the truth and following the facts, and doing so an aesthetically compelling way, so the
Sure.
audience will stay along for the ride, obviously, and especially this arc, which goes a lot, covers somehow a lot of decades and a lot of
Yeah.
subject, and some of my favorite movies. If I showed you the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, you would be convinced they came from two totally different
Mm.
documentaries. You'd be like, how the hell do they get from point A to point Z in an hour and 35 minutes? I have no idea. And
Right.
so I think that's, you want the audience to go on that journey with you. In order to do that, you have to entertain, to some extent. And
Yeah.
so here we wanted to do, like you said, with the reenactments, some of the sexier sort of, the movie goes from like Zalman King to Ken Burns over the course of an hour and 48 minutes. It's like from the Red Shoe Diaries to Civil War, like all,
Mm.
like in less than in under 2 hours. But
Yeah.
also what we need to do is we need to follow the truth, and is to deliver the truth and follow the facts. And to that end, we put Giancarlo through the ringer. I mean, we didn't
Mm.
take his word for it. Everything had to be corroborated. He provided copious amounts of text messages, many hundreds of times what you see in
Mm.
in the documentary itself. He
Right.
provided emails, photographs, and then, yes, video that was excerpted, a very tiny excerpt you saw in the documentary from a much longer piece of video that was, I would say, particularly shocking. In no small part because of when it's from, which is like January of 2019, which is about 7 years after the start of this alleged cuckold threesome.
Yeah.
Um, whereas Jerry and Becky had claimed this was only a 2-year affair, from like 2012 to about 2014, that it was a secret affair between Giancarlo and Becky, that Jerry did not know about it as it was playing out.
Right.
So this piece of evidence, as you've indicated, is pretty much a mic drop when it comes to corroboration, because it basically counters everything, all the different versions of the story that the Falwells had told, including not only how long the affair went on for, but Jerry's knowledge, involvement,
Right.
his playful interaction with it that you see, and incidentally, the shot that you see is not Jerry's only appearance in the total video. It's just one of the most kind of dramatic, obvious, and if you see what he's doing with his hand
Mm.
in slow motion, there you'll understand why that moment speaks most profoundly to the facts.
Okay. Yeah. No, for sure.
Senior pastor.
I'm gonna send this to him.
Tim
There
just
you go.
wagging his finger and
Look at
typing
me
at the
now.
same time.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on. I have one final question for you, and I'll let you go and get back to it. This is more of like a filmmaking side, because I know nothing about filmmaking. I mean, I'm a total amateur. I enjoy movies. I think, I don't know. You'd probably be appalled at what I say is a good movie. I'm one of those people. As someone who is making a documentary, you have to capture hundreds of hours of footage, I'm assuming. How do you have the patience and detail-oriented mind to sift through that, but then to find the right pieces to stitch the narrative together factually? That is quite the task. I just have to hear your insight on this.
Very carefully.
Mm.
and it's onerous. The first thing I want to say is I would not be appalled by your choice in entertainment any more than I would be appalled by someone's choice in their faith or their religion. Whatever floats your boat, dude. Like, that's why it's called entertainment. That's why there are so many options, because it's different strokes for different folks. I have no problem with your enjoying. You might think that I think it's lowbrow. I don't know that's even true. I enjoy a lot of what people might consider to be lowbrow entertainment. Let's face it. At the end of the day, when we get home and get into bed and are going to Netflix or Hulu and chill, as I have to call
We're
it
gonna
now,
Hulu and chill.
we're going to
Right.
Hulu and chill. Like, you don't always want the heavy shit, dude. You want
Totally.
to, unplug the brain and not, go to bed all stressed, or you stay up all night worried about the world. You want to just chill and watch something fun. So I'm all about that. More power to you.
That's why I
dude,
watch Hell's Kitchen on Hulu. That's what I watch. I watch Gordon Ramsay yell at people. I feel a lot better.
You kidding? What the hell's the matter with? No, I'm just kidding.
I knew it.
No, that has always been one of my guilty. But that's like a 10, 15-year-old guilty pleasure, dude. Hell's, are you kidding? Oh my gosh, yeah, totally. So we interviewed Giancarlo for a total of 4 days over like a year's time. We acquire. With convocation footage from Liberty alone, that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage that you have to whittle down and get the most pertinent parts. So yeah, there's a lot of decision making. And in our documentaries, I can use Cocaine Cowboys as an example, as opposed to our latest Cuckold Cowboys. But Cocaine Cowboys, the average like feature project, like 2-hour movie or doc, has about 1,500 cuts in it. Cocaine Cowboys has 5,000 cuts in it. I don't think, God forbid, is quite that elaborate, but it comes close. It's a very fast-paced, quick-cutting piece because we have a lot, story to tell. We have a lot, our interview subjects want to say, and we have a lot of corroboration and supporting materials and photos and archive video and everything and documents and text messages, etc. And so we have a lot that we want to pack in there. But it really, and in our case, we were moving forward and backwards in time. It's
Right.
the chronology spans, 50 plus years, but yet goes back and forth, not in a traditional chronological order. And so it's a lot of trial and error. What is coherent? When do we flash back? How do we not create that moment where the audience kind of groans when the archive footage comes? You're like, you get that moment where you're like, oh, what was the joke in, what was it? It has a very long time. It's like the message moment, where like Keenan Ivory Wayans kind of pops in and goes, message,
Yes.
you want to do that somewhat seamlessly in the cut. And so again, it's trial and error and then experience too. We've been doing this for about 22 years, nearly 20 projects. And so you learn with each one. So again, like I said, some of them you get right, some of them you get wrong, but you always learn something, and hopefully you learn how to better pace a story, and better build a story.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Billy, like I said, truly great having you on. In one sense, it's really a shame that evangelicals can't hold their own accountable. But on the other hand, having folks like you doing documentaries like this just helps people like me and people in my space who are desperately trying to find better paths forward, feel seen, and feel heard and feel even kind of vindicated. Like, listen, we're not making this up when we tell you that there's some serious corruption in these spaces that we have to be aware of if we're going to call ourselves Christians. So a sincere thank you from me personally and from our community. Many folks messaged me just saying, how important the documentary was, how it was so frustrating and infuriating, but so needed. So it's one of those things, right, where it's some bitter medicine, but man, it was certainly needed. So a sincere thank you for making
What's bitter for me is that the Liberty Flames are a better football team than the Miami Hurricanes are. I'll tell you that right now. But also in all honesty, like I think this is the strength of art, of journalism, of social media, that this brought us together, you and I to have this conversation. Two people who would otherwise, never know each other, never meet, and never, right. I think, had this exchange of ideas, which I think is healthy. And I think what's missing, obviously, from so much of the discourse these days on in whether it's social media or religion or politics or whatever it is. And I'm very grateful to you for watching the doc, for telling other people about it, and for having me here to have this conversation with you.
Well, you can bet anytime you cover anything evangelical, I'll be reaching out to talk about it. So thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Good night and good cuck.
Jesus.